Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibididitam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuvigadantiye Bhurida Janaha. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I promised that I would begin by discussing Kabir, and so I will. We are continuing to discuss the entry from October 28th, 1882. It's a very long entry, full of really rich philosophical and spiritual teachings, and we're in the middle of it. And Sri Ramakrishna is about to talk about Kabir, but I should remind you of the context again. Just before he talks about Kabir, he says, he talks about the chameleon, which we should all be experts in, the parable of the chameleon, right? There's a chameleon on a tree. One person goes, sees it as green, comes back and tells his friend, hey, go check out that green chameleon. Next one goes, a little bit later, sees a red chameleon. Comes back and said, why are you pulling my chain? It's red, not green. And so 4 or 5 times, different people go, they see it in different colors. And then finally, there's one guy sitting under the tree, the man sitting under the tree, who lives there, who says, stop your fighting, because it's a chameleon. This thing is a chameleon. It's a special kind of animal which changes colors, and sometimes it's colorless. So you're all right, but just don't limit the chameleon, that animal, to what you see it as. And so likewise, we should never limit the divine to what we think of God to be, the divine to be. Whether that's Christ or Allah or Krishna or Ganesha or Kali or non-dual pure consciousness, that would correspond to the colorless chameleon, right? They can all be true. But the divine itself is infinite. Okay, so right after saying that, he says the following. So we're starting from page 150 of Nikhilanji's translation, if you want to follow. Kabir used to say, the formless absolute is my father, and God with form is my mother. God reveals herself in the form which her devotee loves most. Her love for the devotee knows no bounds. It is written in the Purana that God assumed the form of Rama for his heroic devotee Hanuman. Okay, there's a lot to discuss here, just focusing on the Kabir point he makes. He says, Kabir used to say, the formless absolute is my father and God with form is my mother. What is the original Bengali, first of all? Kabir bolto, Nirakar amar bap, Shakar amar ma. Okay, so now I have to remind you of the terms that I put on the board in the past couple of classes. Nirguna. Guna means attribute or quality. So nirguna means without attributes. Also impersonal, non-personal. Saguna. So nir means without, sa means with, and so it just means the opposite. With attributes and personal. What kind of attributes? The attributes of the personal God. Omniscient, omnipotent, who creates this world, looks after us, responds to our prayers, and so on. Okay, so the personal God. Nirakara, akara means form, so nirakara means without form. And sakara means with form. Sa-akara. Now, there are different possible permutations, as we talked about already, but it's important here to review this, to frame our discussion of Kabir. So, one conception of ultimate reality is that it's nirguna and nirakara, formless and impersonal. Which spiritual tradition upholds this view? Very good. Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Among others, arguably. But that's one that very clearly supports the idea of absolute reality as nirguna nirakara. What about? It's a good question, and that did come to mind. The thing is that Buddhism is a vast tradition with many sub-schools that developed after Buddha's time, and some of them come close to this nirguna nirakara conception. You find some schools of Mahayana Buddhism especially, which come close. Now, if you talk about Theravada Buddhism, not so much. They don't even seem to conceive the ultimate reality in any positive terms. So that's a good question. I would say that it depends on which school of Buddhism we're talking about. Some schools of Mahayana Buddhism come close, I'd say. Now, what about Saguna Sakara? What traditions? Give me some examples. Huh? Rama, yeah, and like basic. You said Rama. Oh, Ramanuja. Yes, very good. Correct. Because Ramanuja, the founder of the Vishtadvaita school of philosophy, of Vedanta, he believes ultimate reality is Vishnu, Narayana, who has a distinctive form, so Sakara, and is very much Saguna because he has all of the auspicious attributes. Okay? So that's a good example. And there are many others. Madhva's school of Madhva Vedanta or Dvaita Vedanta, dualistic Vedanta. Christianity, why? Because they believe in Christ as God incarnate. That's also a form. It could be form in the form of a human body, right? It could be a spiritual form, like the form of Kali with 4 hands. It can be the form of Ganesha. It can be so they don't have physical bodies here, right, like sitting with us. Maybe they are here. But it could also be human forms, right? Okay. What spiritual traditions uphold the conception of ultimate reality as Saguna and Nirakara? Islam is one of them, very good. Anything else? Judaism, good. Anything else? What about on the Indian side? Very good. And we're missing one more. I mean, at least. Huh? She said Brahma Samaj. Oh, yeah, we should. For people online, there's somebody throwing out answers, correct answers. Do we have a mic for the audience? Yeah. So, okay. But anyway, that's, yeah. One more that's kind of... Zoroastrianism, I don't know. I don't know enough about Zoroastrianism to say so. But in India, Sikhism. Sikhism is another good example. Now, tellingly, Sikhism, the main scripture is this Guru Granth Sahib. It's a beautiful scripture full of songs, bhajans. The whole scripture is just songs, composed by great saints, including the founder of Sikhism, Guru Nanak, but also other saints. And they include a lot of Kabir's bhajans, Kabir songs, which is significant, I think. Kabir can be pushed in different directions because he's one of these great mystic singers who realized the divine through their music, through their craft. And often, and they weren't philosophers, and they kind of refused to get pinned down to a particular theology. And that's why this statement of Sri Ramakrishna's raises some interesting questions. He says, Kabir used to say, the formless absolute is my father and God with form is my mother. That's Nikhilanji's translation. But actually, I'll just read you the Bengali here. Kabir bolto, Nirakara amar baap, Shakara amar ma. Nirakara, Kabir used to say, Nirakara is my father and Sakara is my mother. Okay. Now, the thing is, as we've just discussed, this Nirakara can go either with Nirguna or with Saguna. Nikhilanji is pushing it in the Nirguna direction. It's Nirakara Nirguna, formless, absolute, capital A. That seems to be the ultimate of classical Advaita Vedanta, Shankara's school. So he's putting that language into the mouth of Kabir here. And he's saying that Sri Ramakrishna is quoting Kabir as saying that. And God with form is my mother, that's fine. The God with form, Sakara. Sakara has to go with Saguna. You can't have Sakara and Nirguna, at least as far as I can tell. You can't have God with form, but who is completely personal, attributeless. Because, why? Because it has at least the attributes of the form it has. Whatever the form, 4 arms or whatever, that's already an attribute. So that doesn't mean it means it's not attributeless. So this is the only combination that's impossible. Nirguna, Sakara. So it has to be Sakara, Saguna. So there, I can't object to Nikalanji's translation, God with form is my mother. But his translation of Nirakara as the formless absolute, I think that's open to question. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that it's complicated. And I think it's significant that the word Nirakara is broader than just the formless absolute. It could be pushed in either direction. It could be Nirakara Nirguna and it could be Nirakara Saguna. And one question is whether Kabir is thinking of, okay, this is a separate issue actually, I'll get to it in a second. There's a lot of stuff going on with Kabir here. He uses the term Nirakara, but he also uses the term Nirguna sometimes in some songs. I'll mention one of them. And so when he says Nirakara, when he thinks of God as Nirakara, is he thinking of Nirakara Saguna, the personal God but formless, or Nirakara Nirguna, formless absolute of Advaita Vedanta, which is strictly impersonal and attributeless? That's one of the questions I want to raise and hear from you guys about. Anybody who's listened to Kabir bhajans in the past, or, because he has wonderful bhajans. That's one question. Just to complicate things further, which I love doing, because it's always important not to read Sri Ramakrishna's teachings in isolation. Compare what he says here about Kabir with what he says elsewhere. What does he say about Kabir elsewhere? I'll give you one example. And I hope you'll see what the issue is that's raised by this second passage. December 22nd, 1883, so about a year later, he says, Sri Ramakrishna says, one should not discuss the discipline of the impersonal absolute. And the term in Bengali is Nirakar Shadhan, Nirakara Sadhana. Again, Nirakara, not Nirguna, Nirakara. Okay. Or the path of knowledge. One should not discuss Nirakara Sadhana or Gyan Yoga Sadhana. That means, or the sadhana of Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, with a bhakta. Through great effort, perhaps the bhakta is just cultivating a little devotion. You will injure it if you explain away everything as a mere dream. Then he says, in the very next paragraph, Kabir believed in the impersonal absolute. This is Nikalanji's translation. The Bengali is Nirakaravadi. Kabir was a Nirakaravadi. He did not believe in Shiva, Kali, or Krishna. He used to make fun of them and say that Kali lived on the offerings of rice and banana, and that Krishna danced like a monkey when the gopis clapped their hands. All laugh. Okay, now, I want to hear from you. Is there any prima facie contradiction or tension between what he says here and what he says in the earlier passage we read? Kabir used to say, the formless absolute. Well, now let's stick to the Bengali terms. The Nirakara is my father and Sakara is my mother. He says that, right? October 28th, 1882. And here, Sri Ramakrishna seems to be saying that Kabir believed in, he was a Nirakaravadi, but I think the context, see, this is something I talked about in a previous class, but I want to remind you of it. It's very, very important. Throughout the gospel, Sri Ramakrishna uses this term Nirakara many, many times. But depending on the context, sometimes he's thinking of Nirakara Saguna, the personal but formless God. Like in what context? Actually, in this context, he was earlier thinking about it because he was talking to Brahma Samaj followers. And he specifically told them, hey, you guys are bhaktas like me, even though you don't believe in God with form, because they believe in Nirakara Saguna. But now in this passage, the December 22nd, 1883, I think Nikalanji is correct in pushing Nirakara in the direction of the formless absolute of Advaita Vedanta, Nirguna Nirakara. Why? Because the context is, I think, pretty clear. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, that's Shankara's sadhana. He also says you will injure the bhakta's faith if you explain away everything as a mere dream. What's the one tradition in India that, well, at least the one Hindu tradition in India that says that this world is a dream? Advaita Vedanta, Shankara's school. So in this context, I think Sri Ramakrishna has in mind Nirakara Nirguna when he's thinking of Nirakara, okay? So, do you see any potential tension between these two passages? Think about it. Can you give the mic to, yeah.
So probably the Nirakara and the Sakara and like they are like less dense and more dense kind of spectrum.
Less what?
Less dense and more dense kind of a
dense.
spectrum. I mean, that's what Patanjali Yoga Sutra says, right? It's like you go to Sakara and then Nirvikalp and then Savikalp Samadhi and all those things. So it's like less dense and then it's more dense and then you go backwards to less dense. But it represents the same.
Nirvikalpa, right?
Yeah, Savikalpa, Nirvikalpa.
Yeah, or it would be sampragyata to asampragyata.
Yeah, so it's like less dense and more dense, but it's the same thing. I mean, I don't know. If
That's very much along the lines of Ramakrishna's teaching, absolutely. The question is, what exactly is Sri Ramakrishna's view of Kabir? What did Sri Ramakrishna think Kabir's conception of ultimate reality was? Here, in that earlier passage, October 28th, 1882, I think he's pushing Kabir in the direction of the Vijnani. He just told the story of the chameleon, and he says the man sitting under the tree, that special person who sees a chameleon all day, that person sees God in many colors and sometimes is colorless. And then he goes, Kabir used to say, the formless absolute is my father and God with the form is my mother. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's very significant. I think he's saying Kabir is an example of that person sitting under the tree. This is somebody who's realized the divine as formless and also with form, as the impersonal absolute, but also as the personal God. That's what I think that's how I read it. But then this later passage which I read to you, December 22nd, 1883, I think it complicates matters. Yes, so can you pass the mic too? Thank you. You can be our mic runner for the day. We'll miss you.
The way I understand it is that Kabir may have realized the full spectrum, like God with form, without form, but as his preference is to rest in God as Nirakara. And like that's why he says he's a Nirakaravadi. Maybe that's his preference.
But Nirakara Nirguna or Nirakara Saguna?
I don't have enough information to determine that.
It's tricky, actually. I'm going to talk about some of his songs, but that's a nice suggestion. You're saying, look, this is one way of reconciling what Sri Ramakrishna says on December 22nd, 1883 about Kabir with what he says earlier. Well, that Kabir was a Vijnani who realized the divine in many different forms and aspects, but still had a preference. Like, think about Sri Ramakrishna. He realized the divine in so many different forms and aspects, but he also had a preference. What was his preference? Kali, Divine Mother Kali. Not to say she's higher or lower or more real, nothing like that, but just a preference, right? And so that's a very interesting suggestion. That's one way to reconcile it. So when Sri Ramakrishna says Kabir believed in Nirakara, he didn't believe in Shiva, Kali, or Krishna. It is tricky. He did not believe in Shiva, Kali, or Krishna. You'd have to kind of read that in a weaker sense as not that he denied their reality, but that it was not his preference. He preferred to think of God as formless in some way. But that is one way of, because see, if we're serious readers of the gospel, we can't dodge this. We have to explain it in some way. So that's a very good suggestion. Anyone else have ideas? Can you give the mic to Narayana?
Isn't Kabir a Muslim? Isn't Kabir a Muslim?
Wasn't Kabir a Muslim? It's tricky to say, but
I thought he was, but I don't know.
Well, I think there was Muslim influence, possibly upbringing. Is that true that he was raised as a Muslim?
I think his dad was Muslim and the mom was
Hindu, so a mixture. I mean, he definitely inherited both traditions, is what I'd say.
And even when he died, Hindus and Muslims, they actually did not know how to bury him,
Right, whether to give him a Muslim burial or a Hindu cremation or something. Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah. So I think he inherited both streams, and that's significant. Now, how many of you have listened to Kabir's bhajans? You have, right? Today, you were speaking of Isha, right? I just listened to this amazing Kabir bhajan by the Isha, and it's relevant to today's talk, actually, to today's class. The song is called, my Hindi pronunciation is terrible because I don't speak Hindi. So, Nirgun Galiyan Sakri. Anyone want to correct my pronunciation? Okay. It's a song about Nirguna. Notice the first word is Nirguna. Nirgun. Kabir is talking about Nirgun. And let me read the lyrics of this, okay? He's saying, Nirgun Galiyan Sakri Mhari Heli Vahan Chadiyo Nahi Jaye. And I'm reading the English transliteration, which makes it even more difficult to read. Anyway, so he says, these are lyrics of this song. The path of Nirguna, Brahman, is a narrow one, my friend. It is not an easy journey to make. He doesn't say Brahman, he says the path of Nirguna. The Nirguna path, Galiyan, is a narrow one, my friend. It is not an easy journey to make. And I'm just going to read the remainder as a translation. But if you do make it through, you shall meet the beloved. Now notice the word beloved. It's already complicated. Beloved, Pya mile. Priya, I think that becomes Pya in Old Hindi. And the cycles of birth and death shall end. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. It's a beautiful song. Let's go to my, the refrain is, come to my world, this Nirguna world. It's a beautiful Nirguna world. But is this a world of Nirguna Nirakara or Nirguna Sakara? This is what is it? Is it Nirguna Nirakara or is it Saguna Nirakara? These are the two possibilities. So let me keep reading the song and then let's talk about what you think it is. So already I think that this beloved, this language of beloved, that strikes me as more devotional. And so maybe that supports more the Saguna Nirakara. Okay, but let me keep reading and then we can talk. Kaha uge, kaha aste. Where does the sun rise? Where does it set? Where does the illumination happen? It rises right here, sets right here. This is where illumination happens. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. Now the song seems to be tilting in the direction possibly of Nirguna Nirakara. I don't know. Because actually these metaphors, the sun never sets, the sun never rises in pure consciousness. It's a famous Sanskrit verse in classical Advaita, actually. But let's keep reading. Kahan ko garje, kahan barse mhari. Where does it thunder, O friend? Where does it shower? Where does the dry turn green? It thunders here, it showers here. Here it turns from dry to green. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world, this Nirguna world. I've been struck by the arrow of the sacred song. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. By the way, I'll post a link to this song, the Isha version of it, in the YouTube description so anyone can listen to it and you can think for yourselves about it. Then he says, Nirgun ka bazar mein. So now he's using a metaphor of this Nirguna bazar, Nirguna marketplace. In this divine marketplace, Nirguna marketplace, invaluable jewels are being traded. One guided by his guru makes the right deal. But one without his guru loses that deal, messes up the deal. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. Then he says, such beings do not return to be born. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. In the limitless field, oh, my friend, my master resides. Again, we get this interesting, Sahib. In the limitless field of this Nirguna world, my master resides. I think that's coming closer to Saguna Nirakara. I don't know, master. Where's master when it comes to non-dual pure consciousness? Kahe Kabir Dharamdas se. Kabir says to Dharamdas, there is no death or aging there. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. That is where light happens. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. I've been struck by the arrow of the sacred song. Oh, my friend, let's go to my world. It's a gorgeous song. But now we have this question. The song raises this question. He uses the word Nirguna a million times here. It's the name of the song. This Nirguna world that he's inviting us to come to go to. We're his friend here, right? Is it Nirguna Nirakara, Saguna Nirakara, or both? You think it's both? The bhakti musings of an Ishvara Koti. Yeah, he might have been an Ishvara Koti. If he was a Vijnani, then he may very well have been an Ishvara Koti. Okay, so this song you guys think might be supporting kind of both Nirguna Nirakara and Saguna Nirakara. That's entirely possible. But what about so a lot of his songs are full of bhakti. I mean, I would say the keynote actually is bhakti. But it does seem to be mostly bhakti directed toward the formless personal God. Okay, so Nirakara Saguna, that seems to be. So I'll give you an example. It's a beautiful prayer. I would rather be cut apart by a saw than have you turn your back on me. Hug me close and listen to my prayer. I am a sacrifice to you. Please turn your face to me, O beloved Lord. Why do you turn your back to me? Even if you cut my body apart, I shall not pull my limbs away from you. Even if my body falls, I shall not break my bonds of love with you. Between you and I, there is no other. You are the husband Lord, and I am the sole bride. Says Kabir, listen, O people. Now I place no reliance in you. In you meaning people, right? Because all his reliance is on God. It's obviously an ecstatically devotional song. It's a prayer addressed to the personal God, clearly. But it would be like formless personal God. All the songs in the Brahma Samaj that people are singing constantly in the gospel are devotional songs addressed to the formless but personal God, right? So we can interpret Kabir's song along those lines. Now, what exactly was his stance toward God with form? I think it's complicated. One other question. I mean, there are multiple questions, but one other question is, Sri Ramakrishna says, Kabir used to say, Nirakara is my father, Sakara is my mother. Where does he say this? What's the source for that claim? I asked one or two other people, and nobody's able to track it down. Is it from a song? Is it a kind of a well-known statement that he made, recorded in some kind of biography? Was it passed down to Sri Ramakrishna somehow? So any suggestions, and online, people who are participating, you can also chime in the YouTube comments. I'll look through them. I would love to know if Kabir actually says that anywhere. It's a striking statement. And if he does, obviously that supports the view that Kabir was a Vijnani and that he upheld this really expansive conception of the divine as impersonal, personal, with form and without form. But he has a lot of songs about Ram. Okay. And he talks about the whole story of Ramayana, actually. And so one song is, the mighty Ravan lived in a fortress like Lanka with the ocean as a moat around it. Yet today that house of Ravan is not heard of. What shall I ask for? Nothing is permanent. I see with my eyes that the world is passing away. Despite having thousands of sons and grandsons, in that house of Ravan, the lamps and wicks are gone. The moon and the sun cooked his food. Fire washed his clothes. Under the Guru's instructions, one whose mind is filled with Rama's name becomes permanent and does not go anywhere. Says Kabir, listen, without Rama's name, no one is liberated. So now he's praising the efficacy of, the power of, the name of Rama, and then everything depends on what Rama means. And is Rama Saguna Sakara or Saguna Nirakara? And I'm reminded actually of another great saint from the 20th century named Ramdas, Papa Ramdas. Has anyone heard of him or read anything of his? Wonderful. He's got this autobiography called In Quest of God, written in third person because he was so free of ego that he couldn't say I. And it just completely incidentally, he visited Dakshineshwar, where Sri Ramakrishna was for a long time. Not after Sri Ramakrishna passed away, decades later. But the moment he entered into Sri Ramakrishna's room, he just dropped on the floor in ecstasy and rolled around the floor for a half hour in ecstasy. So that's Ramdas, Papa Ramdas. His father was his guru, and his father initiated it into a Rama mantra, Ram's name. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. And the moment he got the mantra, it was like an intoxication, and he just kept repeating it spontaneously all the time. And he became mad with this, desire to realize God, and he realized God. But when people asked him, what do you mean by Rama? He said, do you mean the one who fought Ravana and all that? He says, no. He's the all-pervasive divine. So I think Kabir had something like that in mind when he talked about Rama. And he doesn't deny that Rama in the form of an incarnation. I'm talking about Ramdas now. And in fact, there's a beautiful multi-volume book called Ramdas Speaks. I recommend it. Have you read that, anyone? It's really nice. And he talks about interpreting the Gita pretty much along the lines of Sri Aurobindo and others who interpret it from the standpoint of Ramakrishna's Vijnana. And he says that the divine in the Gita is both personal and impersonal, both with and without form. So it's worth looking at. So I think Ramdas is an example of somebody who might have been a Vijnani also. So anyway, Kabir Kabir, this is the question. So I want to hear from people online as well. Do you think Kabir was a Vijnani? I think I lean toward Adya's, your suspicion, which is that he was a Vijnani and that Sri Ramakrishna did think he was a Vijnani, but that his preference was toward the Nirakara Saguna, the formless but personal God. But if anyone else has other suggestions, I'm open to them. Let me know. Okay. Barring that, let's continue. Sri Ramakrishna continues, I read that God reveals herself. Oh yeah, this is also, I'll read it again. It's short and it's significant. And I'm changing the he and the himself to she and herself, as usual. God reveals herself in the form which her devotee loves most. Her love for the devotee knows no bounds. It is written in the Purana that God assumed the form of Rama for his heroic devotee Hanuman. Okay. The term here for his love for the devotee knows no bounds is actually a very short one. Bhakta Vatchal, Bhakta Vatsala. God is Bhakta Vatsala. God loves his devotees or her devotees. Because the divine loves us, she will lovingly manifest to us in the form that we love to think of her as. Okay? So that's what I call in my academic work manifestationism. I think that Sri Ramakrishna is introducing a new paradigm of understanding mystical and spiritual experiences called manifestationism. For details, look at chapter 5 of my book, Infinite Past, Infinite Reality. But in general, I think this also captures the beauty of Hinduism. This idea of the divine as Bhakta Vatsal, this is, I think, at the basis of Hinduism. Many people mistakenly think that Hinduism is polytheistic. But I think that's wrong. And I recently did a podcast interview with a monk named Swami Padmanabha, a nice person in a Vaishnava tradition, a Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And he came up with this term. He says, no, Hinduism is polymorphic monotheism, he says, which means one God manifesting in countless forms, polymorph, right? Morph means forms, poly means many, so manifesting in many forms. But I want to modify that slightly because I don't want to limit the divine to just monotheism, which is just the personal God. Monotheism seems to imply the personal God. So I would suggest polymorphic monism, provided we understand monism in this very broad way to encompass, all it means is there's one divine, which is both impersonal and personal. And that impersonal, personal, infinite divine manifests in countless forms, is polymorphic. So polymorphic monism, I would suggest, is the view of Hinduism. So if any of your friends ask you, is Hinduism polytheistic? You say, no, it's a polymorphic monism. Now go away. You'll give him a headache. So, yes. You want to give the mic to him?
Even the word Hinduism is actually a colonial word.
Yeah.
And actually the real terminology of it's not even religion, it's called Sanatan Dharma,
Yeah.
which is eternal Dharma.
The eternal Dharma, yeah.
So, I think
Yeah, and Sri Ramakrishna in one place, he uses the term Sanatana Dharma. And he says the Sanatana Dharma has all the different conceptions of the divine. So this polymorphic monism kind of idea. But that within Hinduism, you get these different sects and traditions which have tend to have narrower conceptions of the divine. Right. It'll be like Nirguna Nirakara, Saguna Nirakara, Saguna Sakara, and so on. Right. But then there are other Hindus who take the whole kit and caboodle. And I actually think that like in a kind of non-intellectual or sub-intellectual way, if you just visit different Hindu households in India, for instance, even here, my own mother's shrine, for instance, she's got Kali in there, she's got Ganesha in there, she's got Ramakrishna in there, she's got, Aurobindo's in there. It's like the more the merrier kind of an attitude. And I think that's pretty typical, actually. And she's got her Ishta Devata, her preferred form of the divine, but that doesn't prevent her from worshiping other forms of God as well. And I think that captures the kind of, I don't want to generalize, but it is at least one common attitude among Hindus, polymorphic monism. Okay, so let's continue. Sri Ramakrishna says, it gets pretty heavy. It's the beginning of a new section in the Bengali, and the new section has a title. The title is Kali Roop o Sham Roopet Bakkha. An interpretation of the form of Kali and the form of Shama, Krishna. And Anando ke jana jaina. That's the second heading of this section. Anando ke jana jaina means one can never know the infinite. Okay? Now, let us begin with this section. Sri Ramakrishna says, the forms and aspects of God disappear when one discriminates in accordance with the Vedanta philosophy. The ultimate conclusion of such discrimination is that Brahman alone is real and this world of names and forms illusory. It is possible for a man to see the forms of God or to think of him as a person, her as a person, only so long as he is conscious that he is a devotee. From the standpoint of discrimination, this eye of a devotee keeps him a little away from God. Okay, let's pause here actually. First of all, Vedanta philosophy, what does he mean? Advaita Vedanta, classical Advaita Vedanta of Shankara, right? Vedanto bicharid, kache, rup tup ure jai. Yeah, Vedanta vichara. If you reason in accordance with Advaita Vedanta, you don't accept God with form. Not only do you not accept God with form, you also don't accept Saguna Brahman at all from the ultimate standpoint. Saguna is a lower truth, it's a lower reality. Okay. Now, now he's speaking from the standpoint of classical Advaita Vedanta when he says, it is possible for a person to see the forms of God or to think of him as a person only so long as he is conscious that he is a devotee. From the standpoint of discrimination, that Advaitic discrimination, the eye of a devotee keeps him a little away from God. So what they seem to be, what classical Advaitans seem to be thinking is, so long as you are, even if you're having these really ecstatic realizations of the personal God in different forms, that can't be the highest realization. Why? Because there's still subject-object duality. Because you're still eating sugar at the end of the day. And eating sugar is not good enough. You have to become sugar. This is the classical Advaitic paradigm. And that's why they put the personal God and bhakti on a lower level than the path of knowledge and the path of knowledge and the impersonal absolute. Okay, and I want to say again, this is because I get this. I'm not even joking, like almost daily, because I'm well known now for defending a Vijnana Vedanta interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, and kind of emphatically arguing that his expansive philosophy of Vijnana Vedanta, and especially his conception of the ultimate reality as impersonal and personal, as formless and without form and with form, and his attitude toward the world, not as a dream or as an illusion, but as a real manifestation of divine consciousness, of divine mother. That's the way I see it. I emphatically contrast that Vijnana Vedanta philosophy of Sri Ramakrishna with Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. And I do it on the basis of his commentaries, because I think if you want to argue about Shankara, you should look at his commentaries, the Sanskrit commentaries. And I see him saying again and again that the personal God is not ultimately real. He says it in his commentary on the Brahma Sutra in many places. And it's also an upadhi. It's an illusory limiting adjunct superimposed upon the one truth, which is non-dual pure consciousness. And he also says the same thing about the world being an illusion. And regularly I hear from, interestingly, devotees in our tradition. A lot of these people, they get emotional about it. And they say you're wrong in saying that Shankara didn't believe in the personal God. And wait, he didn't say by Jagat Mithya, he didn't mean that the world is an illusion, that it's a dream, that it doesn't exist. He just meant it's impermanent. First of all, I think that's wrong just on an exegetical level. If you just study the original commentaries, especially look at his commentary on the Brahma Sutra. It's highly authoritative and it's very, very clear on these issues. That's number one. And number two, if you really want to push that view, if you really want to defend that view, I think you have to admit that you're disagreeing with Sri Ramakrishna. That may not matter to you, but and so if it doesn't, it doesn't. But Sri Ramakrishna clearly understands classical Advaita Vedanta in the hardcore way that Totapuri taught him, which is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya means the following. Not Nirakara Nirguna Brahman alone is real. The impersonal, attributeless, pure consciousness alone is real. The personal God is not ultimately real. And Jagat Mithya not in the sense of just being impermanent, which is kind of banal because every school of Vedanta accepts that, but radically non-existent. It never existed. At no point in time did this universe exist. It's false that I'm talking to you right now. That's the radical classical Advaitic position. On Sri Ramakrishna's understanding, I agree with Sri Ramakrishna. A lot of people disagree with me and Sri Ramakrishna on this issue, but I want to just, one of the ironies for devotees in this tradition is that they have to disagree with Sri Ramakrishna's own understanding of classical Advaita Vedanta. And so, yeah, argue with him too. You don't have to just argue with me, argue with Sri Ramakrishna. Okay. That was fun. I enjoyed that. Okay. Now, does anyone want to argue with me? And now with Sri Ramakrishna? Now I've got somebody, an avatar on my side, so good luck. Okay. Let's keep reading. He says, do you know why images of Krishna or Kali are 3.5 cubits high? Because of distance. This is a really interesting paragraph. Again, on account of distance, the sun appears to be small, but if you go near it, you will find the sun so big that you won't be able to comprehend it. Why have images of Krishna and Kali a dark blue color? That too is on account of distance, like the water of a lake, which appears green, blue, or black from a distance. Go near, take the water in the palm of your hand, and you will find that it has no color. The sky also appears blue from a distance. Go near, and you will see that it has no color at all. I just want us to reflect on this paragraph. And I want to ask you, does anything strike you about this paragraph in terms of, we've read about 150 pages so far. Oh, actually, no, that's not true because there's a long introduction in Nikalanji. But anyway, we read a sizable amount of the gospel already. We are familiar with a number of his teachings. What is Sri Ramakrishna saying in this passage? And does it seem to stand in tension with anything else he says elsewhere? Think. Anyone? No thoughts on this? Aren't you struck by this? No? Yeah, can you give the mic to Adya?
This is just my understanding is that if you are, by distance, he means that if you are if you have distance from the divine, meaning you maintain like a small amount of separation, you will be imposing some of your upadhis or limitations or preferences on the divine and viewing the divine. You're not just, or experiencing the divine just as it is pure. When you go close enough, meaning like when you merge in the divine, then you see it's, you can't impose any of your preferences or gunas anymore. That's just my
That's very good. You use the word merging.
Yeah.
See, one question that this passage raises is, because it's something he says elsewhere as well, what does proximity signify here? Like getting closer to the divine. What does that mean? And what is maximal nearness?
Merging.
You're suggesting merging, becoming one with the divine, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Here's one question that I think this passage raises. If Sri Ramakrishna endorses this view, see, one question is, based on the context, is he endorsing this, or is he saying this is the way that people who follow Shankara's path of knowledge reason? Because he was just talking about the standpoint of discrimination, right? That's one question to keep in mind. It's possible that he's kind of still channeling the classical Advaitin when he's saying this. Okay, that's one. But it's also a fact that in other places in the gospel, not in the context of classical Advaita, he says the same kinds of thing. And he quotes a Ramprasad song, a beautiful song that he used to sing. Is Mother Kali really black? Oh no, she's not. And so now the question is, here's one of the questions that this passage raises. I think one a classical Advaita Vedantin could read this and feel vindicated and say, see, he's placing the formless, impersonal absolute on a higher footing than personal God with form. But what do you have a
Yeah, I don't
take on that?
necessarily see like a hierarchy, because eternally, if you want to maintain a separation
Yeah.
with your divine and call it the beloved, sure, that's also fine. You're still in bliss and you're still free from dukkha and whatever, right? It's liberation. On the other hand, if you want to merge and give up all your identity and become sugar, that is also liberation.
Perfect,
so
yeah.
liberation can look like many things. At the end of the day, we just want freedom from suffering, right?
Excellent. No, I think that's great. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my reading of this. I think, see, what's crucial is when you're confronted with the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna's and you're having some difficulties like this, trying to answer some questions, it's really important that whatever your answer is, it needs to tally with what he says elsewhere. And so in many, many other places, he says that the forms of the personal God are real and that he's realized so many of them himself. And he has this idea of nitya sakara, the eternal sakara, the eternal forms of God. In some places in the infinite ocean of the divine, the ice doesn't melt, even with the rising of the sun of knowledge, which is very interesting. The sun of knowledge should melt everything, and yet that remains unmelted. How can that be? Eternal forms of God. So I think we can't just cherry pick and pull this out and say, he supports classical Advaita. That wouldn't be plausible. I think what you're suggesting is more plausible. And the way to think about it is his beautiful metaphor of two different states of liberation. One where you're eating sugar and the other you're becoming sugar. And what you're suggesting, I think, is that this coming nearer to the divine and ultimately merging into the divine, that's the becoming sugar ideal. Of classical Advaita Vedanta, perfectly fine if you want that. But no higher and lower. And then bhaktas, in order to enjoy the bliss of divine love, they don't want to merge. So instead, they want to eat sugar. The only way to eat sugar is to maintain some slight separation, at least from the sugar. There has to be an eater separate from the sugar to enjoy the sugar being eaten. And again, Sri Ramakrishna clearly doesn't place one ideal above the other, and he says it's a matter of preference. And so here, now coming back to this metaphor he's using about coming closer, I think what this really amounts to is, yes, Kali is black. And I've realized her as black, not me, but Sri Ramakrishna. And so I know she's black, and she's eternally black, and yet she's also green and red and colorless. And I've also realized my identity with Kali as non-dual pure consciousness, Nirguna Nirakara Brahman, because she's everything. She's the impersonal, personal, infinite divine who is polymorphic, who assumes many forms and also is formless, right? And so they're just different states. One is a state of merging with the divine as non-dual pure consciousness, and the other is being in a loving communion, in a state of loving, and an eternal loving relationship with the same divine, but as a personal God. Okay, so I think that would be the more plausible interpretation. He is not denying the reality of black Kali, Mother Kali as black, or any of the forms of the personal God, because if he were to, he would be contradicting what he says in so many other places in the gospel. I don't think that's plausible. And he would be denying his own realizations, not plausible. Yeah.
Yeah, so Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy is non-denialism rather than non-dualism.
That's funny. It's a good little fun. Non-denialism rather than non-dualism. Yeah, I like to think of him as the both-and avatara, or as espousing a both-and philosophy. The Vijnana Vedanta is a both-and. Because he noticed, and this is kind of human nature, it's to have either-or kind of thinking, the opposite of that. God is either with form or is without form. God is either personal or is impersonal. You know? And he was never like that. And that's why I think the last Sunday talk I gave, I talked about how when he studied math at the age of 5 or 6, he was good at addition, but he was miserable at subtraction. Because he never wanted to deny anything, non-denialism. He didn't want to subtract anything. Everything is part of that divine truth.
Maybe that's quantum mechanics, right? It's like this and that both.
The wave and the particle,
yeah,
that kind
both,
of thing.
right? And so how would you reconcile this with Kshetra and Kshetragna, like the quotation from Gita?
Chapter 13 of the Gita.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a tough one. Okay, how would I relate this, what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, to the concepts of kshetra, which means field, and kshetrajna, which is the knower of the field, in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita? It's quite complicated, I would say, and there are different commentaries on the Gita, of course, as you know. And so Shankara will have one interpretation of these terms. Sri Aurobindo, which is, I'm teaching a class in the Gita, but Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna, and so we're using Sri Aurobindo's essay in the Gita. He has a very different kind of interpretation. But the kshetrajna there, for Sri Aurobindo, would be more like the impersonal, personal divine, the Purushottama, which is, and for Shankara, it would be, he tilted more in the nirguna direction, the nirguna nirakara, so just the impersonal, absolute, sakshi, witness consciousness. And so, again, I would say that in the context of this passage, that just as this passage supports the idea of Mother Kali as both personal and impersonal, both with form and without form, I would say that the Ramakrishnan / Aurobindonian interpretation of kshetrajna in chapter 13 of the Gita, the knower of the field, would be of the knower of the field as the impersonal, personal Purushottama, divine, infinite divine. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep reading. He says, therefore I say that in the light of Vedantic reasoning, and here again, always remember, Advaita Vedantic reasoning, Brahman has no attributes. So he says, Tai bolchi Vedanta darshanet bichare Brahma nirguna. He's using the term nirguna. And here, does he mean nirguna sakara or nirguna nirakara? Yeah, it has to be. There is no nirguna sakara. It's a trick question. Good. Okay. Very good. The real nature of Brahman cannot be described, but so long as your individuality is real, the world also is real. And equally real are the different forms of God and the feeling that God is a person. তাঁর কি স্বরূপ তা মুখে বলা যায় না, কিন্তু যতক্ষণ তুমি নিজে সত্য ততক্ষণ জগতও সত্য, ঈশ্বরের নানা রূপও সত্য, ঈশ্বরকে ব্যক্তিবোধও সত্য. Okay, another very interesting passage, isn't it? First of all, he's saying that according to classical Advaita Vedanta, Brahman is nirguna. Okay, here it's clearly nirguna nirakara. And then he says, but so long as your individuality is real, the world also is real, and equally real are the different forms of God and the feeling that God is a person. Well, again, I think that if you take this out of context, the classical Advaita Vedanta may jump up and down and say, see, he supports our position. Because one possible interpretation is that he's saying that, well, so long as you're ignorant of the highest truth of non-dual pure consciousness, and you think of yourself as real, then you have to assume the reality of the personal God. Then you have to assume the reality of this world of names and forms. But when you realize the highest truth of your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness, all of that vanishes. It turns out none of that was real. That's the classical Advaitic position. And again, I think we could, well, what do you think? Is that a plausible interpretation? Yes or no? And why or why not? And if you don't find it plausible, what's a better interpretation? That's why nobody comes to these classes. I make you think too much. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Just saying it's essentially plausible. I mean, bottom line, it's a continuum of action and awakening that allows you to literally dissolve the world that is superimposed on the essential Brahman. So unless you are able to relate the 24 cosmic principles that end up making the world as is read through an involution into the world as we experience it, and you're left only with the Brahmajana, right?
I'm not sure I follow what you're saying.
Well, unless you're able to recognize the lime brick dust, and then you're really only left with the general experience of general jhana.
Jnana, the jnana rather than vijnana.
Exactly.
So you're saying this corresponds to something like the jnana stage. Yeah. So that's one I think important move to make, which is that, look, we need to, as always, fit this into the broader context of his other teachings. And one of the keynotes of his teachings are these two stages in spiritual experience, jnana followed by vijnana. Reaching the roof is jnana, and you look upon the world as a dream. But then subsequent to that is a stage of vijnana, realized by some Ishvara kotis and maybe a few others, where you realize that this entire world of names and forms is a real manifestation of that same Brahman that you realized in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Yes, so I think from a vijnana standpoint, if we take that kind of perspective, I think there's a different interpretation of this, which I find more plausible. And it's kind of along the lines of how Adya interpreted the previous paragraph, you know. There are these two different states of being. One is the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, there is no subject-object duality. And the only way he could explain it is using a salt doll as an example. And he says, imagine a salt doll, a doll made of salt, going to measure the depths of the ocean. The moment it sets foot in the ocean, it melts into the ocean. It becomes one with the ocean. In that state, there's no question of you having a sense of individuality. Your individuality is not real in that sense, shotto. It's not satya in that sense. Okay? And in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, no perception of the external world, no perception of a personal God, no possibility of a loving relationship, because that also implies subject-object duality, which is transcended in this state. But when you come out, basically what he's saying is, so long as you are not in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, this radically non-dual state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you are an individual, and there is a personal God, and all these names and forms around you are also real. So I think one part of this teaching of his is, hey, you Advaita enthusiasts, be very, very careful here. Because I see you poo-pooing bhakti and poo-pooing the personal God, and you still haven't transcended body consciousness. You're not in a state of samadhi. You have no right to do that. You're still within the jurisdiction of Shakti. And all this looking down on bhakti and all that is part of the play of the ego, which is still part of this duality. I mean, I think that's one way of understanding what he's saying, because he says it in many other places. He warns people against practicing Advaita unless they have transcended body consciousness, unless they have completely transcended worldly attachments and desires. Otherwise, you become a hypocrite. And he says, you nijake tokai or notake tokai. You said you deceive yourself and you deceive others. So I think that's part of it. And also, so when he's saying, so long as your individuality is real, the world also is real and equally real, there are different forms of God and the feeling that God is a person, I don't think he means this in the classical Advaitic sense. I think what he means is, so long as we feel ourselves, we have a sense of I, whether that's the ego attached to lust and greed or the I of a devotee, in either case, we have to accept this world of names and forms. We have to accept a personal God as all real. Okay. And then when we attain the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we won't perceive Shakti. We are not going to perceive the personal God. We won't perceive the world. And if we come back from that state of Samadhi, we may very well look upon this world as a dream. But even then, that doesn't justify us in thinking that the world is unreal or that the personal God is unreal. Totapuri felt that way, interestingly. If you've read the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, when Totapuri, the Advaitin, the classical Advaitin, came to Sri Ramakrishna, he was an extreme classical Advaitin. He did not believe in the personal God. When Sri Ramakrishna would clap his hands to Mother Kali, Totapuri asked him, are you making chapatis or what? So he'd be making fun of him. And then, after Totapuri helped him to achieve Nirvikalpa Samadhi by taking a shard of glass and striking him between the eyebrows, and then he cut the form of Kali in half. And then, again, you might think, he's cutting the form of his beloved Kali, so doesn't that mean that the form of God is lower than... But wait, so he does go into Samadhi, the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but then he comes back. And when he comes back, he turns around and becomes Guru to Totapuri, And that very Totapuri who rejected the personal God, first of all, he mentions in the gospel later, Sri Ramakrishna says, when I would sing these songs to Mother Kali, Totapuri would start crying. It's a very touching moment, actually. Involuntary, I mean, almost with embarrassment, because Totapuri shouldn't be moved by these devotional songs, but he was. That's one thing. But then second is this more miraculous story, where Totapuri suddenly has this terrible health problem, and he says, I'm already a Brahmagyani, let me just commit suicide. That's not even suicide, I'm just going to drop my body, leave my body. And he tries to, and he starts walking into this river, and no matter how far he walks, no depth. He's not able to drown himself. And then he has this kind of mystical experience where Divine Mother reveals herself to him. And he finally accepts the reality of Shakti. And so the way I interpret that whole incident, this play, is Sri Ramakrishna, Totapuri gives Sri Ramakrishna jnana, or teaches him how to attain jnana. And then Sri Ramakrishna turns around and turns Totapuri the jnani into a Vijnani. He says, thank you for giving me Nirgun Samadhi, and now I'm going to take you one step further and give you Vijnana and make you accept my mother, my beloved mother, Divine Mother Kali. So all of that, I think that we can read this passage along those lines. That when Sri Ramakrishna was in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, no question of individuality or world or personal God, he cut Mother Kali in half. But that doesn't mean that Mother Kali was a lower truth and that this world is not a real manifestation of God. Actually, that's a further stage in realization, Vijnana, which usually only Ishvara Kotis can attain. But even that, again, is complicated, and I think there are some exceptions. And I think that these two categories of Jiva Koti and Ishvara Koti, they're not as hard and fast as we might sometimes think. And some reasons for thinking so are Mahapurush Maharaj, Shivananda Maharaj, one of the great monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. In a letter in Bengali, he wrote, Sri Ramakrishna didn't give me the chaprash, the stamp of an Ishvara Koti. And he says, but by his grace, I've been elevated to the status of an Ishvara Koti. And if that's true of him, of course, he was a great soul. But I think that gives hope for the rest of us as well. Okay, so do we have any questions online? Do we have any online questions? Or in person? Yeah, Leela, can you give it to Leela?
So, how would you explain the pathway through Nirvikalpa Samadhi of Swamiji? I mean, he experienced Vijnani first and then Jnani.
Oh, you're saying that Swami Vivekananda experienced Vijnana first and then Jnana. And are you thinking of the incident when Sri Ramakrishna touches him?
Yes.
And then, yeah, it's a very interesting incident. And I'll just remind people of it if they're not aware of what she's referring to. It's recorded in the Leela Prasanga, the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, where he says, he himself narrates it. He says, this is what happened when Sri Ramakrishna touched me and blessed me. He said, I'm walking around and I see nothing but Brahman. Everything is a different manifestation of Brahman. I'm walking across the street and the carriage I see is Brahman, so I don't get out of the way. I see the horses are Brahman, I don't get out of the way. I sit down to eat. My mother's serving me food. I can't eat because I see the food as Brahman. He says, I saw everything as Brahman. And then he says, when that intoxication lessened a bit, then I started looking upon the world as a dream. So what you're suggesting, this is my reading of the passage, is that he had there were two dimensions to his non-dual spiritual experience that Sri Ramakrishna gave him. The first dimension, the earlier experience, was one of Vijnana, seemed to be, something like Vijnana, where you see everything as Brahman. And the second experience of that same Advaitic experience was more of a classical Advaitic experience of the world as a dream. Can you give the mic to Adya? Thank you.
I understand it slightly differently, that the state like what Swami Vivekananda was in initially when Sri Ramakrishna touched him, I feel like that's like a temporary like dropping of the ego, like ego dissolution. It may not particularly be where like he's established in Vijnana. Like I see Vijnana, this is how I understand it, as being established in where you're embodied, your enlightenment is embodied fully. You're not just
given a glimpse or something. Yeah, but I think are you thinking of the very first incident when that's different.
No,
I'm talking about something 2 years later in 1884. That's a separate incident. So the one you're referring to is like maybe the second meeting that they had, where Sri Ramakrishna touches him, and he says he starts seeing the whole world like swirling and then disappearing, and he starts freaking out, and he says, "What about my parents? What will happen to them?" And then Sri Ramakrishna says, "Okay, everything will come in time." That's not what I think she was referring to. It's about 2 years later after his father dies. He is with Hazra. He was friends with Hazra. And he was joking with Hazra about, what a weird, ridiculous view that Sri Ramakrishna is saying, because he was still kind of leaning toward Brahma Samaj, the Brahma Samaj view. And so he's like, it's blasphemy to say that this mug is Brahman, and this table is Brahman. How silly is that? And then Sri Ramakrishna says, what are you guys talking about? Whoosh. And then he has this extraordinary dual Advaitic experience. That's what she has in mind. But yeah, thank you. Okay, so nothing online? Okay, there's one online. And anyone else in person that has a question? No? We're good? Okay, so online.
Does Saguna also mean Shakti with volitional agency for Maya and creation, or just attributes which is inert without agency?
What was the word? Volitional?
Volitional, yeah.
Okay, so can you repeat the question?
Does Saguna also mean Shakti with volitional agency for Maya and creation, or just attributes which is inert without agency?
Oh, I see. That's interesting. Okay, so does Saguna Brahman, Shakti, mean, does it also include volitional agency and a desire to create this world, or not? And I think the answer is it could be either. The personal God, I think, loves sportive play, lila, and so she loves this cosmic lila. She loves to play in the form of this world and as this world and by creating this world. But unlike some traditions, especially Western traditions, which claim that God was constrained to create this world, like had to. It was a necessity that God created. That's not the Vedantic view. The Vedantic position is that God isn't forced to do anything, because then you're robbing God of freedom, and that's absurd. But God freely chooses to play in the form of this world and with us as his playmates or her playmates. And so I think that typically the personal God is understood as having this volitional agency to create. But that doesn't mean that she has to. She does it for fun. Okay. Any remaining questions from anyone? Yes, Leela has a question.
When Sri Ramakrishna was saying that you have to be quite careful about declaring yourself having been completely fully merged with the divine, that he would include savikalp, samadhi?
Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, you're saying he's sort of cautioning people about practicing Advaita Vedanta without the requisite qualifications. Okay. Is he also warning people against prematurely thinking they've had realizations of the personal God? Is that right?
Well, full realization with the personal God and entire loss of ego. So essentially, does that mean you're all the way up to Savikal?
Look, I'll be honest.
Where you're really perceiving yourself at the beach, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, look, I'll be honest and frank here, because I was in India for 13 years, and then in 2022 I came back here, and I just started getting left and right. People are telling me about their realizations. It's not something that's done as frequently in India, I think. At least with monks, like people aren't so forthcoming with monks about. Look, I'm not gonna. Who am I to judge whether somebody has actually had a realization or not? But it seems far too common here. And I also feel like if you really had a realization, I feel like the last thing a person who has genuinely realized God would do is talk about them in public with the mic, with knowing that's being recorded on YouTube. So I think that it's just the current climate. It's prestigious to be enlightened. And because then you can get your own YouTube channel, you'll get your own little nice group of followers and disciples, and you'll make a little money through Patreon. And yeah, anyone can become a guru with a laptop and a little charisma these days. And drugs. Let's throw in drugs. Why not, too? So just to add to the fun. You do drugs, and you whatever it is, like some kind of psychedelic or something, and you're on cloud 9, and you think you've realized God. And so more people than ever are claiming realization. I went to Amsterdam a couple years ago for an academic conference at Leiden University on the entropy of mystical experience, but like 90% of the people there, the participants, the presenters, were people who specialize in drug research, and that's fine. But I think they were like privately coming to me and saying, like, do you do drugs? And I was like, no, I don't do drugs, I'm a monk. I said, oh, you should. Ayahuasca's great. And like all this, they were trying to push that on me. So anyway, because of the pervasiveness of drug use now as well, as a means to higher states or whatever of consciousness, and I'm not denying that it's possible, but I just think that the dangers of thinking that you are further along on the spiritual path than you actually are, I think they're greater than they ever have been. And that spiritual bypassing and just, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of glamour with being enlightened and realized that, yeah.
Any mention of siddhis by Ramakrishna, like
Siddhis?
Yeah.
Did he have any siddhis?
Like, did he mention anything about siddhis, or did he have any siddhis, or?
Okay, well, there are two different questions. I can answer both quickly. First is, did he say anything about siddhis? Yes, he said a lot of things about siddhis. He says, don't go for them. He warned against them constantly. And he said that siddhi means some kind of supernormal power, like becoming tiny or becoming very large, or reading people's minds, or transporting yourself from one place to another, like a lot of different, those kinds of things. And he says these are not sought after by sincere spiritual aspirants, and they're very dangerous, and they can take you away from the spiritual goal and make you egoistic about having those siddhis. At the same time, that second question, which is, did he ever exhibit any siddhis? Is that the second question? Yeah, that's an interesting question. And you don't find him, I think the greatest siddhi, in a way, is this ability to transmit spirituality through a touch. I can't think of many saints who are just, and then sending people into these ecstatic states of samadhi and advaita and all that. So, but that's not a siddhi in the traditional sense we're talking about. Those are more mundane. Did he exhibit any of those? There's one incident toward the end of his life, which is recorded in Lila Prashungo, Sharananji's biography of Sri Ramakrishna, where he's going to pass away in a few months from cancer, throat cancer. He's completely bedridden. He can't even get off his bed. And then Holy Mother swears that, I believe this is you guys, I have to go back to read it for the exact details, but as far as I remember, it was something like this. Holy Mother saw him jump out of bed and zoom downstairs and run into the woods. For what purpose? Because psychically, using his siddhis, paranormal powers, he saw that at that very moment when he was lying on his bed, his beloved future monastic disciples, like a few of them, were in the forest, and they were one of them, I think, was about to step on a cobra, a deadly cobra that would have killed them. And Sri Ramakrishna, knowing that, using his siddhis, came out and then like shooed the cobra away and then zoomed back up. And so that is I think that's one of the only recorded incidents of him using his siddhis. There might be others, and that could also be a YouTube comment if anyone wants to suggest. Other times, Sri Ramakrishna exhibited supernormal powers. Let me know. Yes, thank you. Okay, very good. Anything else before we wrap it up? Let me give you a heads up on our next gospel class. It is going to be next Wednesday, June 25th. And it's a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about the 7 planes of consciousness. Stay tuned. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.